Hello everyone, good morning. This is Liv live from Carkine Studio. You're watching The Opening Bell. Well, we saw rate hike expectations dampened the market sentiments yesterday. Let's look at over how the market charter is panning out today. Taking cues from Wall Street that kick-started its week with a decent gain, the ASX 200 jumped up during early trading hours, and we can see yesterday's losers, primarily economic sensitive stocks such as banking and mining players, picking up steam again today. The top performing stocks in this index are IGO Limited on the ASX IGO and the A2 Milk Company Limited on the ASX A2M. The Diversified Mining and Exploration Company IGO soared on progressing Tianqi transaction towards completion. Then resource players Iluka Resources, Chalice Mining, Pilbara Minerals, Santos and Orocobre also led the gainers pack on the ASX 200. Whereas on Monday, in a gloomy session, the Australian benchmark index dropped 1.81%. Rate hike expectations weighted heavily on the market mood. Post-Fed's hawkish note indicated mid-last week St. Louis Fed President James Bullard's statement on Friday that the Fed could raise rates as soon as next year. Now, those comments were somewhat negated on the same day by the Minneapolis Federal Reserve President, Neel Kashkari. In his statement, he said he didn't see interest rates going up until 2024, so 3 years away. Despite all the panic looming around interest rate hikes, the Fed also made it clear that it planned to keep up the monetary support until the jobs market comes back to pre-pandemic levels. But the prospect of sooner than expected interest rate hikes helped nudge investors away from the stock market that surged to near record highs at the start of the last week. Meanwhile, overnight, Wall Street rebounded from lower levels and global equity markets surged from a 4-week low as market participants bet on economic growth, while the American dollar retreated from Friday's 10-week high. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 pared much of the losses seen in the previous session as investors repositioned portfolios after last week's surprise by the US Federal Reserve regarding its hawkish shift. The Dow Jones added 1.76%, while the S&P 500 gained 1.4%. The Nasdaq Composite was up by 0.81%. Turning to sectors that are sensitive to the economy's fluctuations, such as energy firms and banks, they recovered in Monday's session after they'd fallen sharply since the US Fed's meeting on Wednesday, when the central bank caught market participants off guard by anticipating those rate hikes in 2023. Moving on now, and the yields on 10-year Treasury notes turned higher on Monday after falling to a 4-month low of 1.354%. However, the benchmark note was still trading well below its last week high of around 1.6% after investors reacted to the Fed statements on rate hikes. Meanwhile, on Monday, the US dollar fell as market participants evaluated whether a perceived hawkish stance by the Fed will mark a halt in the bear trend in the US dollar that has been there since March of 2020. The US dollar index fell 0.424% off Friday's 10-week high of 92.408. On the other hand, the Australian and the New Zealand dollars increased on Monday, taking a much-needed breather after recent losses against the US dollar, buoyed by a hawkish stance from the US Fed. But both currencies traded near their respective lowest level since late last year. Before we share more trending updates, it is time for a short break.
Tune in to get the latest information.
Whether it's about market movements or the currency graph,
sectoral coverage or industry news.
we cover it all on our news segments.
Be on top of the latest news
With Kalkine TV.
Welcome back. This is Liv, live from Kalkine Studio. You're watching the opening bell. Moving on to our next segment, let's look at the Australian share market charter for the day and looking at the energy sector first up. Australian energy players such as Woodside Petroleum on the ASX WPL, Oil Search on the ASX OSH and Beach Resources listed on the ASX as BPT and Origin Energy ASX ORG. They're all trading in the green. On Monday, crude oil prices surged higher on rising demand in the Northern Hemisphere driven by the summer season. Brent crude futures were up 1.7% to $74.8 a barrel US, while WTI crude futures rose 2.5% to $73.4 a barrel US. Let's move on now to the miners space and heavyweight miners BHP Group, ASX BHP, and Rio Tinto, ASX RIO, and Fortescue Metals Group, ASX FMG. They're all trading in the red. On Monday, iron ore futures in Asia tumbled, with losses widening after Chinese authorities initiated an investigation into the spot market as prices of iron ore remained at a higher level despite repeated warnings from the government against hoarding and speculation. The most actively traded futures, the September month delivery contract of iron ore on China's Dalian Commodity Exchange, closed nearly 9% lower at 1,121 won or $173.30 US a tonne. Meanwhile, copper prices steadied on Monday, slightly up from their lowest level since mid-April, as China affirms to put a leash on commodities price rallies. The benchmark copper futures on the London Metal Exchange up 0.6%, trading at $9,203 US after falling to $9,011 earlier on the day. On that note, ASX listed copper metals, or players rather, OZ Minerals and Sandfire Resources traded in the red during early trade hours. Then in the yellow metal space, Australian gold miners such as De Grey Mining, Evolution Mining, Ramelius and Northern Star Resources, they're inching up today. Looking at commodity price scenarios on Monday, gold prices recovered from some losses from its biggest weekly percentage fall since March of 2020. A halt in the rally of the US dollar helped yellow metal gain some ground. Spot gold was up 1% to $1,783 US an ounce, snapping its 6-day losing streak. However, it still remained near the lowest level since early May of 2021. The US gold futures gained 0.98% to $1,781.80 per ounce US. Besides, Australian tech space is under pressure despite positive cues from Wall Street. The Nasdaq 100 closed 0.84% higher on Monday, depicting decent demand in the technology space. Shares such as Xero Limited, Zip Co Limited and WiseTech all trading lower during early trade. Moving on now, let us look at the major newsmakers in the Australian share market today. Australian investment firm Washington H. Soul Pattinson or Pattinson and Co Limited on the ASX SOL, alternatively known as WHSP, soared on an acquisition update. The company said on Tuesday it would buy Pierre Milton Corp on the ASX MLT to create a combined company with nearly 11 billion Australian dollars in market capitalisation. WHSP's offer of $6 per share values Milton at 4.05 billion Australian dollars and is at a 20% premium to the stock's last closing price. Under the deal, Milton shareholders will get 3 fully franked dividends totalling 52 cents per share. Now, notably, the deal comes just months after WHSP scrapped its buyout bid for old age home or care home services provider Regis Healthcare. Before we look at more trending updates, time now for a short break.
Tune in to get the latest information.
Whether it's about market movements or the currency graph,
Sectoral coverage or industry news.
we cover it all on our news segments.
Be on top of the latest news.
With Kalkine TV.
Welcome back. This is Liv, live from Kalkine Studio. You're watching The Opening Bell. Let's look at some more important updates now. Engineering company Montdelfius Group Limited, ASX MND, that traded higher on a contracts update. The company today announced it has secured a number of new construction and maintenance contracts in the resources sector, totalling approximately $215 million. Moving on, diversified mining and exploration company IGO Limited soared on Progress's Tianqi transactions towards completion. Now, the key regulatory requirements for the internal restructure of the Australian arm of Tianqi Lithium Corporation to proceed have now been satisfied. The restructure is one of the conditions precedent to the transaction to form a new lithium joint venture with Tianqi. IGO has now received Australian foreign investment approval and, as well as that, notice from the Australian Taxation Office confirming the tax migration of the joint venture entity. Property development company Cedar Woods Properties Limited on the ASX CWP jumped up on the release of a trading update with record pre-sales achieved. Notably, strong sale conditions across the company's high-performing projects have driven pre-sales to a record $439 million as of the 31st of May 2021. Let's also take a glance through the crypto space now. Bitcoin tumbled on Monday to a 2-week low on China's expanding crackdown on Bitcoin mining as investors grew more uncertain about the future of the leading cryptocurrency. Besides that, a stronger US dollar has also put pressure on cryptocurrencies, with Bitcoin falling nearly 9% to $32,241 US. Now, the smaller rivals such as Ether and Dogecoin also lost 14.5% and 27%. That is all for now. We'll be bringing more stock updates to you in our upcoming shows. Please stay tuned for live updates on Kalkine TV across the economy, markets and other sectors. I'm Liv. Thanks for joining me.